Welcome, Mayor de Blasio, Chancellor Carranza. This Senate hearing of the New York City Education Committee has been going on since the morning. We have waited your arrival and your testimony. Once again, the focus of this is school governance, aka mayoral control, and we look forward to your testimony, and we'll have some questions for you afterwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Chair Lieu, Chair Mayor, all senators. Thank you for this opportunity to be with you. Mr. Chairman, I want to say at the outset, I should say, that I will summarize my testimony. We'll provide you the written testimony. I just want to say a few quick points up front from it. Turn to the Chancellor. I also want to immediately borrow from my former council colleague, as you were, Mr. Chair, my former council colleague, Senator Jackson, who prefers the phrase mayoral accountability, and I am going to refer to that phrase frequently in this discussion because I think it does make very clear what is needed to make decisions and make them in an effective manner for our children and our parents while working with all stakeholders productively. So mayoral accountability is a smart way to summarize that. 1.1 million students, biggest public school system in America, and yet at the same time, Mr. Chairman, the Chancellor and I feel absolute accountability, not only to the elected officials that we work with, but to parents and students down to the level of each school. And we are regularly meet community members who raise not only the big issues about education to us, but very specific issues about their school. And the way we interpret accountability is it's up to us to work on those issues immediately, to get all the right people in Department of Education to address them. And I think it's really important for my fellow New Yorkers to understand that, because it's been an experience that we have almost on a daily basis of those very specific issues that have to be addressed. Mayoral accountability gives us the ability to hear an issue and literally get resolution sometimes the very same day, which is the polar opposite of what a lot of us experienced before there was that kind of mayoral accountability. I was a community school board member in the old system. I saw some good examples of that process, but I saw many, many more where the system simply didn't work for parents and students. Issues didn't get resolved. There were all sorts of divisions and all sorts of favoritism that meant that everyday students, everyday parents' voices were not heard, their needs were not acted upon. This system, because it's fundamentally based on an election of all the people, I think profoundly addresses the issue of education so much better. The Chancellor, to me, is an excellent example of what a good use of mayoral accountability leads to. He is someone who understands not only how to get our children the finest education, but also how to infuse a sense of equity into everything we do. And his history shows it, his own personal history, the kinds of schools he went to as a kid and taught in, give him perspective on how we have to create more fairness and equity throughout all of our schools. It is a personal mission for him, and another great example of how this kind of accountability leads us to make choices such as the choice of this Chancellor. We understand also, and I want to be straightforward about this, that in terms of hearing the voices of our parents, we simply have to do better. We want to work with all of you on ways of doing better. When I set out in this administration, as someone who had been a public school parent myself, had been a PTA member, had been a school board member, I believed we had to do a lot of things differently and better than the previous administration did with their version of mayoral accountability. We have made real progress, but we're simply have not gone far enough. We have to do things together to improve some of the structure while keeping the integrity and the meaning of mayoral accountability intact. And we can do that. The Chancellor wisely has hired a new Deputy Chancellor specifically to focus on parent empowerment and to focus on a whole different way of communicating with parents, because Hydra Mendoza got her fan club there, because all of us who are parents and community members know the DOE was never particularly good at communicating with parents and the community and bringing their input in. Again, I would argue we made improvements, but have not gone as far as we hope to go, which is why we want to work with you on some structural changes that will improve that process profoundly. Now, to the issue of what mayoral accountability has allowed us to do, just very quickly, It has allowed us to move a tremendous amount of resources to schools that need them the most, not only improving on the fair student funding formula so that there's much more equity than there's ever been, but also huge programmatic initiatives that everyone here knows: 3K, pre-K, community schools, renewal schools, advanced placement for all, computer science for all, that have disproportionately helped our neediest schools. And we'll come back to you with more an accounting of how that has played out, but a lot of our students and parents have already lived that and see what a difference it has made. Moving things like pre-K, 3K, AP for all, computer science into place in each instance in a matter of just a few years. Those ideas went from idea to implementation with a speed that never would have been possible under the previous system. Very important to note, these equity ideas are working practically. We have the highest graduation rate we've ever had, the highest number of young people being accepted to institutions of higher learning we've ever had, something we're very proud of. 55,000 kids took AP exams in the last school year. We've never seen anything like that before. And our graduation rate, again, the highest it has ever been. So I will conclude by saying this is, I think anyone who's watched this administration knows education is literally our #1 area of concern. I ran for office, my #1 pledge, my #1 priority was pre-K for all. Education is the #1 subject matter that I focus on. The Chancellor and I work together constantly with that understanding that in terms of the priorities of the overall administration, the resources that we will devote, this is what we think will have the biggest impact on the future of the city, getting our public education system to be better and fairer all the time. And I think we should all be proud to see the speed with which change is happening. Lastly, to say, this Chancellor, as I turn to him, has, I think, done extraordinary work already in just 11 months in really bringing the voices of parents in much more deeply. He and I have been holding a series of town hall meetings with CEC members around the 5 boroughs, with PTA leaders around the 5 boroughs. We've met with the ECC, the central group of CEC leaders. This is a very productive dialogue. We intend to continue it, not just this year, but for all the next 3 years. We believe it's making a huge difference in helping us understand things that we can do better. We welcome that dialogue. We want to find ways to make this system work better for everyone. I ask you, as I conclude, please to pass a 3-year extension of mayoral accountability. We can work together to ensure that it comes with the best inclusive measures in terms of the voice of parents, but keeping the integrity of the system intact will allow us over the next 3 years to make additional profound changes for our kids and our parents. With that, I turn to the Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon, Chair Liu, Chair Meyer, Mayor, and all of the senators that are present here today. Thank you for hosting this very important hearing, and thank you all for what you do on behalf of our 1.1 million students here in New York City. I also want to thank you, Mayor de Blasio, and many New Yorkers who have joined us here today. And in particular, I want to take this moment to recognize my predecessor, one of my predecessors, but an incredible colleague. I want to recognize former Chancellor Dennis Walcott for being here. Thank you for your leadership, sir. I am a lifelong public educator. I have devoted my career to helping all children reach their potential because a public school education was the best gift I ever received. Before coming to New York City, I worked in 4 school districts in 4 states across the country, large urban districts. So I come to New York City with some embedded experience on what it is like to work in a non-mayoral accountability system. With that in mind, I can unequivocally say to you today that mayoral accountability is the best, most effective system of government we can provide for the 1.1 million students we serve. In fact, mayoral accountability is central to my decision to move across the country to take on this challenge and this opportunity here in New York City. I knew that our children and their families would best be served in an environment where the vision for their success was clear and everyone knew who to hold accountable for executing on that vision. I knew that I wanted to be able to introduce myself to families, to listen to their feedback and their concerns, and respond as someone with the authority and the resources to actually address them and to directly report to the mayor about the issues that needed tackling. The importance of this dimension of mayoral accountability, parental empowerment, truly cannot be overstated, and it is a chief priority of mine. Our success depends on strong, trusting relationships with the families of our students. That is why the mayor and I have been working diligently to build bridges to parents much more efficiently and effectively than would have been possible under other governance structures. And I can say that from firsthand experience. We created a new division of community empowerment, not community engagement, community empowerment, partnerships and communications, and I brought in to lead that division one of my former colleagues, Hydra Mendoza, who's already been mentioned. With Hydra's support, I have attended 15 in my 11 months as chancellor. 11 months. I have attended 15 Community Education Council town halls, 4 parent empowerment forums with the mayor, 6 Education Council consortium meetings, and 3 Chancellor's Parent Advisory Council meetings, amongst other informal meetings at school sites. All told, I have met with thousands of parents and students and community members throughout the city, and I will continue to do so in the coming years. We have also engaged in an ambitious effort to encourage parents to run for community and citywide education councils and are seeing a robust interest. In fact, we have more than doubled the number of candidates expressing interest in running for those positions. What we hear from parents must inform the policies we make to move the system forward. We can't do things to communities, and we can't only do things for communities. We must do things with communities, and that's the cornerstone of our approach. Backed by this mayor, that is exactly what we've been able to accomplish in a short period of time. Although I am still in my first 11 months as school's chancellor, mayoral control, mayoral accountability has already allowed me to make significant essential changes. For example, some of the earliest feedback that I heard as I began my tenure with listening tours across the city was about the confusion many parents and school leaders felt over who was really in charge and who was accountable for providing supports to their schools. This prompted me, with Mayor de Blasio's strong backing, to initiate a major restructuring that brought resources closer to our schools, streamlined the way schools are supported, and clarified the lines of accountability. In the other systems I have worked in, the political and bureaucratic obstacles to implementing change of that magnitude would have been far more formidable and delayed. Mayoral accountability has also allowed me to double down on those efforts with a heightened sense of urgency, building on what has worked best. That includes expanding 3K for all and continuing to broaden the reach of AP for all, algebra for all, universal literacy, computer science for all, and college access for all. Most school systems around the country are constantly whipsawing from one strategy to another strategy, almost always to the detriment of students in those systems. I am confident that because we are building on an established set of effective initiatives here in New York City in pursuit of excellence and equity for all, we are going to see even better results faster for our students moving forward. Let me dwell for just a very brief moment on this. Equity and excellence for all means every New York City public school student gets an excellent education, regardless of zip code, regardless of their background. From this vision, I have adopted another personal motto that we are bringing to life every day. We are advancing equity now, not equity sometime in the future, not equity when we're ready for it, not equity when we think we might do it, advancing equity now. My team and I are confronting historic inequities developed over decades, in some cases centuries, of unfair racial and economic dynamics. Our children shouldn't have to pay the price for societal inequalities fostered long before they set foot in a classroom. It is my mission to ensure we move the needle, and that is what animates equity and excellence for all. One other important belief of mayoral accountability, largely absent in the other cities where I have worked, is our capacity to work much more effectively with other governmental agencies and service providers. In most other cities, the education department largely functions in a silo with only limited connections to other departments, if at all. In New York City, however, we collaborate effectively with other agencies on issues ranging from healthcare to social services to transportation to parks to students in temporary housing. In fact, I meet with my fellow commissioners and agency heads on a regular basis. Our highly successful community school strategy is all about marshaling the different capabilities across government and local nonprofits in ways that benefit our students and our parents in real time. That is possible because the mayor can get agencies to work together in ways that just aren't possible under systems that lack mayoral accountability. The proof is in the pudding. What I have seen in New York City, and which I hope you will see as well, is that mayoral accountability produces results because it provides the flexibility to undertake our major challenges, because it empowers constituents to have a positive impact on schools, because it allows for continuity and enables the school system to collaborate more effectively with the rest of the city government and local service providers. Mayoral accountability is delivering for New York City students, educators, families, and most importantly, our communities. I hope we do not turn back now. Thank you for this opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering your questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor. I want to thank you. I want to thank Mayor de Blasio for your efforts on behalf of our school kids. You know, the nature of public hearings is that you don't have public hearings when everything's hunky-dory, right? By definition, a public hearing is convened usually to address some kind of problem, whether it be real or perceived. And the chorus of discontent, if not complaints, from parents, school parents, has been deafening. And so one of the main issues that we want to talk about is how much parental input does the system actually accommodate. We have heard many instances where parents feel they are not listened to. They can't even get a call in. And even in some cases where their input is solicited, they are completely disregarded or overruled. So we want to get at some of those issues. Obviously, there are lots of other complaints as well. The purpose of this hearing is not to address every single complaint. The purpose of this hearing is to look at our system of school governance and how it can be improved going forward. And I want to make note, and we're going to have questions from all the senators here for you. I do want to make mention of the time frame of this. All right, we are currently pondering a 3-year extension of mayoral control that is in the budget resolutions of both the Senate and the Assembly, and in the original proposal by Governor Cuomo himself. We have a couple of weeks until the budget deadline when all of this will be finalized. With regard to the timing of this, the deadline is June 30th. It is certainly of my opinion that we don't always want to take things down to the wire, especially when the school year ends in June, and we want to have some time for any kind of planning to be possible and to be feasible. And also, unlike previous sessions of the New York State Senate, which have been, and I will note, as others have, under Republican control, the Senate has not held a hearing on this issue as long as anybody can remember. And yet, they use the issue of mayoral control as a political football without listening to the parents either. And so I certainly don't want this issue to become a political football and to, you know, whatever complaints they or we may have against you and your administration, Mr. Mayor, this issue is about the school children of New York City and how we run our public schools. And so with that, I want to turn the floor over to Senator and Education Chairperson Shelley Mayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Chancellor Carranza. Pleasure to see you both. Question for you, Chancellor Carranza. I think we're making the comparison to the other large urban districts in which you were in leadership and the New York City model of governance. And I think your point was you were able to move more nimbly and swiftly to address issues. However, my concern is that you're really comparing it, I think, to a very traditional school governance model. I think what we are asking today is, using this concept of mayoral governance, can we improve upon it in a legislative way with a more concrete role for parents or others that will help build on, not revert to the old model, but build on a model of school governance? So can you speak to that, whether a very legislatively directed role for parents or other elected officials could be something that is practical from your perspective as someone who runs the school system?
Sure. Thank you, Senator. I think a couple of thoughts, and if the mayor has some ideas as well. I think that in my experience, almost 30 years as an educator and a system leader, I would say that the issues of public education in large urban cities, New York is in a class all by itself. That being stated, large urban cities, to educate children, particularly children that have had a history of trauma or have had other issues that are attendant to living in a large urban city, are not issues that typically you can get a lot of traction in, because you have to, from an equity perspective, be able to invest, be able to empower. And quite frankly, in some of the cities that I've lived and worked in, to the point of we want to hear from parents, we want to hear from input. Not all of the input that we hear is serving all of the students. So to be able to have a lens that says, what are we trying to accomplish for all of our students, particularly students that haven't historically been served well, it's really important to be clear how this is going to help the city. So to your point, I do think there is an opportunity to strengthen and make what we do better. I think that in my testimony, I've pointed out just how much I have been involved with having conversations with parents, having conversations with community members. I know that in our conversations with the leaders in our community education councils and community education councils, PTA, PTO members, the ideas that they have expressed, we are actively engaging in those conversations about how could that look like in terms of policy or different kinds of practices. And I know that we're interested in pursuing that. So I think there's a role. I would just say that that role has to be tempered with this idea that ultimately the greatest accountability happens when the electorate comes to the polls and votes for the mayor. And knowing that the mayor is accountable for what happens not only in the city schools, but in the city, and the schools are a vital part of what happens in the city, that is the ultimate accountability, I think, that helps us stay focused and very driven to do what's best for students writ large.
Chair Mayor, I just want to add that there's no question we can do better and we want to do better. We want to work with you to determine on your colleagues the best way to do that. I want to give you those some, I think, helpful perspective that the demands of parents, one of the reasons we have pre-K for all. Demands of parents is one of the reasons why this September we'll have 20,000 kids in 3K. By this September, 20,000 kids in 3K. This came from discussions at the grassroots level with parents who said this would make a huge impact on their lives. The reason we have AP for all was from hearing from parents in high schools never had a single advanced placement course. And they looked at the disparity and they said this isn't fair, and we responded. So I want to make clear on some of the most important policy changes we've made, the voices of parents loom very large. That said, you should know that, for example, with the Education Policy Panel, the PP, that there have been numerous instances where that panel, which represents different voices, that panel has said to the chancellor and his team that a particular proposal was not, something they were comfortable with. They've asked for revisions, which they've gotten. They've asked for some things to be pulled back and reworked or reconsidered, which has happened. So unlike, I think, some of what we saw in the previous administration, we see some very good work happening in the give and take that we have right now at the PEP level. I think there's no question that at the CEC level, down at the district level, we need to strengthen the way that input is received, make it more systematic, and ensure that we're really responding to it on a regular basis. We do have many instances where CEC members or CECs as a whole have suggested something that affected the final decision. But we want to make that more systematic. I think that would be healthy because we believe in buy-in to where the chair started the hearing. We want a situation where we know not all parents of 1.1 million kids are going to agree all the time with everything we do, but we want a situation where it's much clearer that parental voices are affecting the thinking and the way we go about making decisions, and we can make that more systematic and something I want us all to work on together over the next couple of weeks.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Mayor. Senator Gounardes.
Thank you, Chairman Liu. Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chancellor, thank you very much. Let me just say at the outset, I strongly believe in the principle of mayoral accountability, mayoral control. As someone who participated in the process when I was in school, I was the first student member of the panel for educational policy, so I was there during the turnover, and I certainly don't want to see us go back to the days where we came from, and so I support the extension that we all put forth in the budget, and hopefully we can continue to improve the process. I do want to pick up where Chairman Liu left off, and that's on parental involvement, and it's not so much involvement at the, which some early people testified, at the structural level or in community meetings or stuff. It's the frustration. The number one thing I hear from parents is their frustration in dealing with the DOE bureaucracy. And Chancellor, you and I have spoken about this our first meeting. They feel like they are banging their heads against a brick wall day in and day out just to get answers to questions, information, or things that their children are owed, especially when it comes to children with special needs. I had a phone call yesterday with a parent who said that she has to sue the DOE every year at the DOE's instruction just to make sure that she gets reimbursed for the specialized services her child needs. That system cannot be sustainable. So as we continue talking about this, it's more than just empowering CECs and PTAs. How are we addressing the real day-to-day concerns to make the DOE more accountable and responsive to parents? They shouldn't have to feel like they're fighting a battle against the providers of their child's education. So can you comment on that?
Sure. Again, I'll start and then I'll toss it to the mayor. So this is something that I've heard in my listening tour from the minute that I got here. And under this mayoral accountability, I had the ability to take a deep look at what are the systems and structures that create that sense of frustration with parents. So within months of my arrival, with the strong support of the mayor, I was able to reorganize, reconfigure the Department of Education, where we went from 22 people on a cabinet down to 9. We reorganized where the work strands are located. We created 9 executive superintendents who are based in their borough, who know the borough. The superintendents are then reporting to the executive superintendents. In short, one of the challenges was knowing who's accountable for the day-to-day operations in my school. Now it's very clear. In X school, the principal is in charge. If that's not resolved at the principal level, it goes to the superintendent. If there's no resolution, it goes to the executive superintendent. It's very clear. We are starting to see better feedback from our parents and communities in terms of knowing who to go to. As it pertains to the big macro issues, in terms of how do I get services or how do I get responses, that is something we are taking on in a very systemic way in a number of areas. We are taking that on. You mentioned students with disabilities. When I arrived, the perception was that issues and programmatic questions pertaining to students with disabilities belong to the Department of Students with Disabilities, Special Ed. We have taken a different approach. It belongs to the entire Department of Education, because if a parent needs to have information about how to access services, it's a matter of communication. So our Deputy Chancellor is making sure that we have people that can answer those questions. As it pertains to being proactive, that's a matter of telecommunications. So can people log onto the website and find the guidance that they need in multiple languages? That's important. Who is responsible for which work strands is also really important, that parents know who to go to and what department to go to. So as you look at the department, and I will say very honestly, from 11 months ago when I arrived, and again, I'm not indicting anyone or anything, it's what I got when I got here, and where we are now, the department has already morphed to being much more responsive to our parents. Are we there? No. We have a lot of work to do. But I will say that without the ability for me as the chief executive officer of this department to have the support of the mayor, who is ultimately accountable, it will make it difficult for me to make those seismic, systemic shifts in a timely manner in order to act upon what I'm hearing from the community. So that's where my perspective is.
If I could just add very quickly, I think we have to see this in just a quick historical perspective, that it's been, a little more than 15 years that we've had mayoral accountability. And obviously for a big chunk of that time, there was a very different attitude previously about the role of parents. When we came into office 5 years ago, we worked particularly to change the programmatic direction of the Department of Education and to stop a lot of the negativity towards parents and towards our educators, and to put in a host of strategic initiatives to change the direction of our schools. That we've seen the impact. We've seen the consistent progress in terms of how our kids are doing and how our schools are doing. We've got a lot more to do. But now we are putting a lot of our priority on improving the relationship with parents. It's not just a question of when a parent has a complaint. It's also about informing parents of what's going on, which I think has not been done effectively enough either. It's a huge apparatus, obviously, serving 1.1 million kids. And I think in big organizations, many times you see a lack of responsiveness to the customer, in this case, the parent and the student. We don't accept that. So we are constantly working to improve how information is provided to communities, but also how we react to concerns and critiques. And what I will tell you is the better we're getting at figuring out how to communicate, the more we are making changes based on what we're hearing back. So, Senator, I think one of the underlying points in your question is there a will to continue to change the way things are done at the DOE? There's an adamant desire to do so. And I think we can say over 5 years we've proven how quickly we can move some of the programmatic pieces. Now we have to move the very structure of things. We have to move how we communicate. We have to explain and make very clear to all our employees they must be respectful and responsive to parents, hear their voices. A lot of times we have learned if you listen to the parent voice, you will end up with a better outcome for everyone. And we've seen even some thorny issues, some co-locations and other issues that were complex, resolvable when parent voices were brought in to hear what would be a workable solution from the grassroots perspective. You can expect a lot more of that going forward.
Thank you. I just have one more question. And I appreciate you using the customer metaphor, because I think this should not be an adversarial process, and all of us in government, we're all in the customer relations business, regardless of what seat we sit in, and I think it's very important that it's a cultural shift as well, from the very top all the way down to the very bottom. There's been a lot of discussion about parental engagement, parental involvement, but we haven't really focused on student empowerment. And so my very specific question is, as part of the reforms that we're considering, would you consider giving the student representatives on the panel a vote? Because currently they have a non-voting seat. So would you consider that possibility as a way to empower students who, believe it or not, can hold their own on a lot of these issues that we're talking about and are pretty mature and serious enough to engage with their education system as it affects them on a daily basis?
Well, you obviously know from personal experience.
But I didn't get a vote.
I know. But I'm saying you know from personal experience what it's like to serve on one of those bodies. And when I was a high school student, I was also involved in a structure that had that. The bottom line to me is, if we begin with an accountability structure that allows us to keep making decisions and moving forward, and what we have now is that, but it has the natural give and take. As I said, the PEP under this administration is a body that offers ideas and alternatives and critiques, and outcomes change because of the process in the PEP. But there's still the capacity to make decisions on a regular basis and a timely basis, the kind of thing we never had under the old system. If we can keep the same kind of proportionality we have now in the PEP, I'm certainly open to different ways of approaching it. And the notion of a student voting role is something I'd be very open to, so long as we still can run this massive operation with the effectiveness our customers demand. And you know there's a real interesting juxtaposition, Senator, of the very same customers, our parents, who are demanding that their input be heard and their concerns be addressed, also want us to be more efficient. They want us to make changes and make them quickly. We've got to keep those two demands in balance.
Thank you. Senator,
Thank you. Oh,
I'm just going to add one quick thing. We believe in parent empowerment, but we also believe in student empowerment. They serve on many decision-making organizations and committees in the DOE, and I'm really happy to announce we just hired our youth voice manager. So at a central level, this person's job will be to bring all student voices forward, but a diversity of student voices, and really strategically have opportunities for them to be part of the decision-making. Late breaking news, so we're excited about that.
thank you, Senator Gurnard. Questions from Senator Jackson, but let me note that we've been joined earlier by Senator Brian Benjamin. Senator Jackson.
So, Mayor de Blasio and Chancellor Carranza, let me thank you for your leadership. It is very important that we all know where accountability lies. And in fact, I've said to you, Mayor de Blasio, before this hearing, mayoral control is a dictatorship. And this is the United States of America. We're not in a dictatorship. And so that's why even Velmanette Montgomery, who was around when mayoral control came about in 2002, I believe she said, and I have to look up the text of it, that it was about school governance and accountability. I think that everyone in New York City wants to make sure that they know who's accountable. But I do think, as you know, the city council, the authority does not allow with the city council. It relies at the state level. And that's why mayoral control or school governance and accountability is at the state level for renewal. And even preliminarily, some discussions I had with some other people, including John Liu, the chair of the New York City Subcommittee on Education, is let's look at 4 years. Why 4 years, people may ask. Well, when we had school boards and when we hired a superintendent and then our term of office is finished, your term ends December 31st, 2000, the next mayor may have an opportunity to say, listen, this chancellor is doing a good job, we need to continue him. So we need to be open towards not only 3, but possibly 4. And I just throw that out for other things such as, you know, I say to you, pre-K, 3K, and all of these things, they are great. But I disagree with some people say it would never have happened if, in fact, we didn't have mayoral control. Maybe it may not have happened. Maybe it would have. But not that it would never have happened. I disagree with that. Just like I don't believe that because I was involved in a lawsuit that sued the state of New York and won billions of dollars for our children, that may not have happened, ever happened if Robert Jackson's not. No, I don't agree with that. But we need to all work together and focus on what we're here for, and that is to make sure that our children, not only in New York City, but New York State, get a good education. So one of the things that I talked about, and I knew many years ago when a former Mayor Bloomberg, when they were dealing with the 3rd grade tests and whether or not we should hold back students at the lower grades if they're not doing well in school. And you know, there's positions on both sides of that story. And there's one or more PE panel for education policy members. I know the one for Staten Island. He did not agree. 3 did not agree. And some of the borough presidents removed them and replaced someone like an hour before the meeting that was going to vote yes. So as the mayor, you have, I think, 8 appointments to the panel for educational policy. Would you agree to want to appoint someone that you determine but not have the authority to remove them if, in fact, you disagree with them? In essence, remove them before their term expires.
Mr. Chair, first of all, I appreciate the comments you made, and I want to just say, I think I appreciate when you use the analogy of the CFE case, your point that perhaps it would have happened even if you were not there. I respect that humility. I would argue to you, I don't think at all it would have had the same impact if you were not there, so I'm glad you were there. I think it is intellectually true that maybe we would have had pre-K for all under a different system. I can only tell you the facts because we lived through all of the previous years. It never happened under the old system, and it never could have happened so quickly. Thank God, because there is accountability and people wanted early child education for free for their kids. We were able to do it. We were able to do it quick. But on your question, I've been in office 5 years. I have never removed a PEP member. And the bottom line from my point of view is there needs to be the flexibility, and I believe this strongly, for a mayor to ensure that the PEP members believe in the fundamental philosophy of that mayor, because ultimately, again, elected by the people to implement a platform I put forward to the people. So I still believe structurally a mayor should have a right to make sure that their members are still consistent with their ideology and approach. That said, I believe you leave a lot of room for disagreement, a lot of room for flexibility, and that's what we've seen already. We've had PEP members that were my appointees who disagreed with specific proposals from my chancellor. And yet we said, okay, if they disagree, there's something to talk through here. And sometimes those proposals were pulled back. or modified. So there was a real give and take. There was no impulse to remove because there was disagreement. But let's say someone fundamentally shifted position. You know, you and I have worked very closely on trying to ensure that there's respect for traditional public schools and not the repeat of the mistake of the past administration in terms of over-empowering and over-investing in charter schools. One of my appointees suddenly had an interest in going in a very, very different direction on charter schools. That would raise a bigger question to me. So I would still like the flexibility to ensure that my appointees reflect my core values, my vision that I put forward to the people. I think it's absolutely fair to say, if ever that moment were to occur, and it hasn't in 5 years and 2 months, but if ever that moment were to occur, that I would have to be very clear to the public why I made that exceptional decision. Clearly, in the previous administration, there was no such sensibility. That incident you refer to was done very arbitrarily, without any give and take, without any public explanation. That's unacceptable to me, too. I criticized it at the time. So I think the current structure, with a clarification that there needs to be some dialogue on that issue, and that's something that should be very rare, if ever implemented, is the right way to go.
Can I just touch on parent involvement? And I'm glad that the chancellor, that I would assume with the mayor's approval, hired a deputy chancellor that was an elected public official and knows what it is to be an elected public official. And that's, I think that's very good.
Adamantly pushed for it, Senator. It wasn't just my approval, it was my adamant belief in it.
But when you talk about parent involvement, when you look at the CECs and the SLTs, the school leadership teams, it's imperative that we make sure, the system makes sure, that those school leadership team parents and members, besides the parents on the SLTs, know what their authority and how to work collaboratively, so that with the leadership of the school reach a consensus. But to know that those parents and appointments by the unions, they know what their authority is in order to say yay or nay on matters that impact the children from their perspective. So I like to make sure that happens, more training. But with the CECs, it seems as though that the CECs have been weakened in the whole mayoral control situation, where they don't have the authority that they had. And I just think that the leadership of the Department of Education, in my opinion, and/or superintendents, do not give them the credit and listening to them as much as they should. I just ask you to consider that. That's very important, because these individuals that are on the CLCs, the Community Education Councils, are leaders, parent leaders that have been elected by their respective parents' associations.
I'll jump in first and say, having been a school board member and lived the exact same life that CEC members are living, long hours, no pay, lots of blood, sweat, and tears to try and help fellow parents, every conceivable problem and complaint brought to them, and they're doing their best to actually get results for their parents. I really personally relate to how important this work is. And one of the things that we've said, now that we have a structure that has really focused on the district level again, you'll remember, Senator, and I know you and I were shoulder to shoulder with our concerns about the previous administration's approach to the DOE. And we often found it to be a more corporate type model of education. And there was a consistent effort to move away from the districts as an important part of governance. You'll remember that under particularly Mayor Bloomberg and Chancellor Klein, they tried to de-emphasize districts. We re-emphasized districts and the role of district superintendents. And further, in the more recent changes and updates that the Chancellor's made, the role of districts even clearer now. Now that correlates perfectly to a clear role for the CECs. We want every one of our superintendents to be working closely with the CECs. We want any changes that are going to profoundly affect a district to be talked through first with the CECs. We want to see what the CECs think and have it be important to the outcome. So if you think of this in terms of a kind of evolution, I think once upon a time we had the school boards. They're obviously entirely district-based, and we all understand the problems that came with that. Under the model of mayoral accountability in the beginning, it went almost 180 degrees the other way, totally moving away from the district model. We have re-emphasized districts, and we've built that up, But now we've got to pull that role of CECs forward. We've got to get the parent voice much more frontal in that process to be much more effective on set timelines, so there's more guarantees for parents. When we've had these meetings around the boroughs, we hear from parents, they actually agree with a lot of the substantive things we're doing. I don't hear a lot of parents disagreeing with AP for all or pre-K for all in the broad direction. I think to Senator Gennardis' point, they believe there has been some real change and improvement on special education, and there's a lot more to do, but that there's been a very different attitude than existed previously and much more effort to meet parents where they are. We're getting a lot of affirmation on the substantive side, but at the same time, we're hearing a lot of concerns about how the process works and why opportunities for parent voices to be early into the decision making are being missed at the district level. We want to fix that, and we can fix that.
So, Mayor, just finally, just 2 points. One, when you ran for mayor, like every candidate, and I said this earlier, but you may not have heard it, every candidate running for mayor said that they would incorporate the 2 Muslim holidays into the school calendar. And in fact, you did not do it on your first year, but you did it on the second year. It had no negative impact on the first year. So you're a man of your words and running for mayor. And then finally, the contract for excellence. Class sizes is extremely important, and we want to continue contract for excellence for class sizes in New York City. So that's very, very important.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Jackson. Senator Benjamin.
I want to make. Oh, it's on. It's on.
It's very much on.
You know, you got to project your voice because Robert Jackson is a hard senator to follow. So I wanted to make sure that I was able to get some bass in my voice. Well, first of all, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chancellor, for coming. I wanted to start off by echoing the comments of Senator Gennardis. I also am a big supporter of mayoral control as long as you are mayor, because I don't know who will be mayor after you, and so I want to be able to relook at this at that time. But the reason why I feel that way is because I believe that you have been open, you have been available, you've been communicating with us, and I think that that is important. Now, with that being said, I have a number of concerns. I want to start off with the Renewal Schools program. As you might be aware, the first day I met you, Chancellor, your first day on the job, matter of fact, was around Wadley Secondary School. Wadley was a part of the the Renewal Schools program. And I'm concerned because, A, Wadley, per the Renewal Schools program's metrics of success, apparently there were 6, they were meeting those metrics. But one of those metrics didn't include math proficiency, which, as you know, when you and I talked, was a big concern for you. So part of what this speaks to is a concern around when I hear that there was $750 million spent on the Renewal School program, but then certain things were not measured as a part of success in the goals. It just makes me very concerned about whether or not it was rolled out right. And I really want to get a sense from, I guess I have to say you, Mr. Mayor, because this happened on your administration. Are there things about the Renewal Schools program that should have been done better, could have been done better, and actually where is it, right? I mean, so now I'm understanding that the program's ended. What does that mean for the schools that are in Renewal Schools? Help me get a sense of where you are on this point.
I will give you the once-over, and the Chancellor will join in, and I'm going to ask my colleagues from the DOE, I need one fact to be updated on the number of students who benefited from the investments of the Renewal School Initiative overall from the original 94 schools. I know I knew that a week or two ago. I need to be refreshed on that. Senator, first of all, thank you not only for your broader view, which I appreciate on this topic, but also on the work you did on the Wadley School issue. I think it was one of the most refreshing moments of the last 5 years of how we could create a better model. And I remind you, and thank you to everyone from the community who participated as well. I do want to acknowledge that trajectory I referred to earlier. We came out of a situation 5 years ago when I took office where the relationship with communities, I think, was broken. The relationship with parents was broken. The relationship with educators was, you know, this close to violent. And we had a lot of healing and fixing to do. And we tried through the renewal program to really create a different model that said, let's invest in schools rather than just shut them down, often very arbitrarily. And we knew that back then, when they were shut down, a lot of times a lot of kids were left in the lurch. There were transitional years when a school was really coming apart and kids were not well served. So we saw a policy of close now, ask questions later that caused a lot of harm. We did not see investment. And these are a lot of schools that, as the chancellor referred to earlier, some decades of unfairness, some reflecting centuries of unfairness in this country, that never got their due. And then suddenly they were being shut down, even if they were beloved by the community, even though people wanted to work to make them better. So the renewal schools model was trying to give every school a chance to turn around and be strong. In fact, the vast majority of cases, that's what actually happened. It was 45,000 students who benefited. And if you look at the 45,000 students and how across that group of students, how attendance went up, test scores went up, graduation rates went up, I'm very comfortable that the money was spent for a good cause. And that was over fully a 4-year time span. Now, what did we learn? We learned that in many cases, investment was what was needed, and some of the specific types of support we provide students made a huge difference, and that a number of schools could turn around. A number of schools, quote unquote, graduated out of the program, and the ones that remained at the end of this year, with the exception of a few mergers from schools that were very small, the others we now believe, with some continued support, will continue to thrive. We don't need them to be in that status anymore. Clearly, we also had a number of schools, I believe it was 21, that did not succeed despite our best efforts. We never thought at the beginning that all 94 would have the same outcome, and we were pretty honest about that. 21, despite that focused investment, we didn't see the dynamics for further progress. But look, in a world where there's been profound inequity and profound disinvestment, when I look at the sum total of 45,000 kids served, and of the original 94, 73 schools were able, in one way or another, to move forward productively, I think it was the right thing to do. Do I think we set up the leadership structure ideally? No, in retrospect, that should have been tighter and more streamlined. Do I think that some of the things that we learned over years, if we had understood them earlier, we might have been able to have more of an impact earlier? I think there's definitely some learning that went on. Some what was stronger, what was weaker in terms of the approaches. But the reason we are now handing off to a different structure is because we also recognized that the overall structure of the DOE was not serving some of these schools particularly well. Again, remember, the previous mayor, the previous chancellors before 5 years ago were trying to undo the district system. They focused on networks, and they focused on a model, as I said, often to many, a more corporate model that did not empower educational leaders to help those schools with all the tools that they needed. When we created most recently a much more streamlined system, it goes chancellor and his top leadership team to executive superintendent, superintendent, principal. It's really, really clear. That also allowed the chancellor to hold executive superintendents and superintendents responsible for any schools in their area that needed additional help. Once we cleaned up and straightened up that system, it became abundantly clear that would be a stronger model for accountability than treating these schools as sort of a separate unit.
So, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Senator Benjamin, thank you again for your partnership. Wadley would have not been possible had it not been for the community led by you to come to the table to look at what can we do differently. And the good news is, where Wadley was struggling with math, when we put our heads together, 14% increase in 1 year. So it shows what can happen. So I want to add to what the mayor has said. So one of the things that the mayor holds me accountable for in every conversation is stop giving me the education ease of the conversation. The edgy speak. And the edgy speak would be something like this. A programmatic approach to school improvement is really a moment in time. It's a binary system, and you only look at certain things.
I've lost him already.
So, whereas if you look at a comprehensive system where you're looking at multiple inputs and you're doing real-time analysis, I've already had people's eyes glaze over. So let me put it in an analogy that I hope will make sense. The renewal program was absolutely necessary. The renewal program was investing resources, and there's a misnomer out there that if it wasn't for renewal, those resources wouldn't have been necessary to have been invested. That's absolutely not true. Students still needed the support. It was an organized way of providing that support. But in essence, renewal was a diet. There's an issue, you're going to be on this diet, and you're either going to lose weight and get healthy, or you're not. Some schools didn't. Some schools did. We have transitioned learning how to eat well, what to eat, when to eat it. Those are the learnings from that renewal diet to a lifestyle. And the lifestyle that we've moved into is now we know what to look for. Now we know where to intervene. Now we know how to continuously provide from an equity perspective the just-in-time supports that schools need so that they don't ever need to be on that diet again. That's the transition, in essence, that we've undertaken with moving from the renewal to a more comprehensive way of looking at all our schools. The bottom line is that schools that have been able to improve their achievement no longer have the stigma of the label. So parents understand that these schools are continuing to get better. And number two, the very thing that got you there are the things we're going to keep investing to keep you there. So if it's additional support in terms of extended learning time, we're not pulling that away because renewal is no longer a label. We're continuing to keep that there, and we're monitoring to make sure that that's continuing to give us the results. So in essence, we've moved from a diet to a lifestyle. And quite frankly, I think this is a better way, I know this is a better way, to be able to make sure that the schools get what they need, and we're accountable for not only the resource investment, but then how we as a system are supporting those schools.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that explanation. Thank you for the EduSpeak thing. I'm going to start using that. Right. Leads me to another question, which is one of the things that I've heard a lot in my district is, and by the way, as you might be aware, I think I have the most charter school students of any state senate district. So one of the things I've heard a lot about was this issue that charter schools will receive the money for the students, and right after the reporting of the number of students, they would then push the students out, but keep the money. And so I thought that was a crazy concept. So I went to the charter schools and said, well, what's going on with this idea of you keeping the money when the kids have left? The charter schools have said, well, we give the money back to the DOE. So either that's true or it's not true, but I figured since we're all here today, we can shed some light on this. So the question that I have for you is, number one, do the charter schools send the money back to the DOE? And if they do send the money back to the DOE, does the DOE send the money back to the school where the kid is? Because what I'm hearing from some folks in the schools is that they're getting the kids but not getting the resources. And so this is a very important issue, and hopefully you can clarify this with everyone here.
So we'll be happy to clarify with much more specificity as well. But in essence, city schools count for enrollment once a year. So that means that the students that you've got are the students that you get funded for. Charters have much more of a rolling, by statute, a rolling count of students, which is approximately every 2 months. So the notion that students, once they leave a charter and come to a district school, it's not necessarily true that that money will follow the students in a timely way. Now, there are circumstances, depending on when they leave, that they will. I think a bigger concern that we've also noticed is when in the school year those students leave charters and come to traditional public schools. Are there any certain benchmarks around the school year around testing and that kind of stuff? So this is a conversation that our charter schools office is working very, very closely with charter organizations around, but there is a modicum of when the money is allocated, it doesn't always come back to where the student eventually ends up. And we can get more detail on that for you.
I would definitely love more detail on that because, and now, is this true that the date by which you keep track of students is October 31st or somewhere in that timetable? Yeah. Okay. Yes. So just so I'm clear, if November 1st a student is released from a charter school back to the district school, there's no way for you to know that happened. And then if there's no way for you to know that happened, there's unless the charter school is being benevolent, you're not sure that you should have received money. I mean, do you reconcile this at the end of the school year? Like how? I mean, this sounds like a pretty big.
Sullivan's team. I hear the essence of your question to be,
Right.
one, we do not want to reward the very unfortunate habit of pushing kids out who may not test well or have other challenges, and we don't want to reward for not serving a particular child inadvertently. So that we need to make sure our funding system within the law is accurate about how many kids are truly being served. And so we will, I mean, we'll get the answer now, but I think you're raising a bigger point, and if we need to talk to you about any law changes or anything else to tighten that up, absolutely affirm your intent here and would like to make sure we're doing this right.
Right. Go ahead.
In an effort to be, Senator, just completely fair and honest, so enrollment from the DOE's perspective is actually adjusted twice, on October 31st, and again it's adjusted on December 3rd. And if the enrollment then indicates that more students are present, then we try to reallocate that. We don't try, we reallocate those funds to meet the needs of those students. I think the bigger question is after December 3rd, what happens with those students, because there's not more money that's following those students. But I think to have all of the facets of how this exactly works, I've asked my chief financial officer to follow up with your office, and we'll give you a detailed briefing on exactly what happens when, so that we know all those particulars.
Receiving the hook from my chair, so I'm just going to throw something out there real quick, which is district superintendents and how they're hired. I really would like for there to be more community involvement in that, in terms of the CECs and some of the community leaders, because, you know, no disrespect, you're running a system of 1.1 million students. You don't know all the mechanics of what's happening in this district or that district or this district or that district, and I believe the input of CECs and community members as it relates to who is being hired to be the district superintendent. As far as I'm concerned, that's my chancellor. I'm District 5. I'm looking at that person. I mean, I see you and we do this and all that, but that's who's day in and day out educating our children. And so I think, you know, that needs to be a part of the mix in terms of how we think about mayoral accountability / control going forward, because it's very important.
I want to affirm that point. So this chancellor, to his great credit, as I said, we are moving on a continuum here. We're getting more and more success at deepening this approach to districts, and we have to improve the approach to listening to parent voices. This chancellor, to his great credit, when he determined a new leadership structure with the executive superintendents as the immediate supervisors for the superintendents in the 32 districts and the other specialized districts, he involved parent leaders in the interviews for the executive superintendents. So obviously those were big regional positions, but he reached out to the CEC leadership. He got parent involvement at that level. We certainly want to do the same thing in the process for choosing district superintendents. We want to make sure we can do it in a way that works and is effective, but unquestionably there's a way to bring CEC members into the interview process for superintendent candidates. We want to do that.
I'm sorry.
Very briefly, please.
Very briefly. So I will only add to that. Not only did we do that for the executive superintendents, we did that for the chief academic officer and for the other deputy chancellor positions that were created, like the deputy chancellor for parent empowerment, etc. I will also say that working with the CEC president leadership, we are in the process now of finalizing an evaluation that all CECs will use to inform the evaluation of the superintendents, so that we have parental voice in that evaluation as well. So we hear you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Benjamin. And many of your questions related to school governance. Many of your questions went beyond school governance, and glad to see the mayor and chancellor so engaged on those issues. Perhaps we'll continue that discussion another time.
We welcome that,
Absolutely.
Senator.
We have questions from Senator Myrie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and please forgive my voice. I'm a little under the weather, which is an unfortunate development given the change in the weather outside. But I know I want to thank the mayor and the chancellor, who I believe is a constituent. It is good to have constituent in high places, and I appreciate you guys coming out. Today I want to comment and then question. I'm a product of public schools. I'm a proud product of School District 17. And it really is an honor for me to now be in a position to represent that very district in the state Senate. These issues are very important to me. And I know the Chancellor mentioned the ability to make seismic changes. The issue of whether or not we should maintain mayor accountability in school governance, to me, hinges on this, as well as parent involvement and the ability to make seismic changes in things like the school-to-prison pipeline. When we talk about what the state of our capital investments and needs are in our schools, I do think that having a streamlined process does allow for that to happen quicker, and so I am there on that. I think I have expressed this both to the mayor and the chancellor and to your staff that my concerns are mostly on the school governance side and the voices that are involved there and the ability to hold folks accountable in a very real way. And so I just want to ask, I think that you have told us that more information is forthcoming. Your ideas on how to get folks more involved and have folks more accountable is forthcoming. I very much look forward to seeing what those plans are. And I just wanted to know, in one aspect, would the administration be open to having term limits for PEP members in order to increase the diversity of voices over time?
Yes, I mean, well, look, Senator, first of all, to your first point, when you raise the school-to-prison pipeline, I mean, I think everything we've been trying to do in the last 5 years is to try and undermine that horrible history and create not only more equity in education, but more equity in society in general. And, I'm very proud to say that we have been consistently reducing the number of incarcerated people in New York City. And we're going to do a lot more, and we're looking to work together with the Senate and the Assembly to do a lot more. But it begins, I believe, by giving kids an early child education. So I am convinced we'll look back and say that when this city devoted itself to pre-K and now 3K is when we took one of the biggest steps to undermine that horrible history of the school-to-prison pipeline. But on your question about term limits, look, again, it's up to the legislature to decide what makes sense in terms of the CECs. But when it comes to the PEP, I'm comfortable with the notion that so long as the integrity of mayoral accountability is kept intact and the kind of proportionality we have in the PEP right now is kept intact, I'm comfortable with the notion that you would say someone only gets to serve for a certain amount of time to make sure there are new voices. I personally have term limits. So clearly I can relate to the notion, and I can see, and once upon a time we had a big fight in this town on this topic, and I'm very comfortable that at that point I believe strongly there should be 2 term limits for municipal officials. I still believe it. So yes, the important thing is so long as that's done within a construct that protects the integrity of what is working with mayoral accountability, then I'd be very open to it.
Thank you, Senator Myrie. And now, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chancellor, it is the tradition of the Senate that the chairperson goes last. And so whatever questions that haven't been asked already, it's my responsibility to get them out. There remain many questions. I'm not going to get you with all of them. I do want to point out that, as you know, the Education Council Consortium has issued and discussed, deliberated, and voted on what I consider a very comprehensive set of suggested reforms with regard to mayoral control and school governance. I do want to highlight a few of those items and get your specific feedback on them. And I will start by saying that, as you yourself have noted, this is not about any one mayor or any one administration. It is about school governance and what is best for our school kids going forward in the future. And your administration certainly has its fans as well as critics. So it's not about any one administration. As much as many people would agree with what you may have done in your administration, there is always the question of, well, who might the next mayor be and how might she or he either help or hurt our public schools. So one question that comes up is the makeup of the panel for educational policy. You've made it very clear that you want to retain control, meaning you would like to be able to continue to appoint a majority of the members. So I won't even ask you that because I know I think everybody is clear on your position on that. But you were asked before about fixed terms for the administration. I'm sorry, for the fixed terms for the members of the PEP. And you correctly noted that you've never removed a member of the PEP, but we have seen a previous mayor do that. We refer to that as the Monday Night Massacre. You and RJ and I were on the council at the same time when that happened. So what about the next mayor? Is it reasonable or unreasonable? Could you support fixed terms for PEP members? Because you've never removed somebody, but a future mayor might.
I want to really appreciate the question, and I want to say with warmth, Senator, two senators, I do, when I look at you, I feel young again, because I think back to...
We ain't young, man.
Yeah, good. It was great while it lasted. But I look back to, we all came in the council at the same time together, and that was getting close to 20 years ago. But yeah, we all were very distressed that day. I remember that profoundly, and we never want to see that happen again. But I want to first affirm a very honest point about what we're talking about here, because now we have a reality we didn't even have a week ago. Not only the governor, but both houses of the legislature are all focused on the same fundamental proposal, which is 3 years. And as was noted earlier, and I thank Senator Benjamin for his kind comments about the direction we've taken, this is really about what we will be able to do in the remaining 3 years, and then the vote organically would occur again exactly as a new mayor is coming in. So I know you're asking a very fair, big picture and structural question, but I want to also offer a very pragmatic point, because I think it's just true about the reality we face. If the decisions we make this time, we think the legislature thinks with a new mayor that additional adjustments have to be made in the real world we're living in, you will absolutely have that opportunity on a very timely basis. Literally before a new mayor has even had any chance to get acclimated, you'll be debating this issue again. On your specific question, I would argue that I use that analogy, which I don't think would happen, but I have to be prepared for. What if a member I appointed decided for whatever reason to take a very different philosophical tact on something that was profoundly important and deviated from the philosophical direction that the administration had told the people we were going in, and that endangered something very important? I have to be aware of that possibility, and I would argue to you that the ability to replace a member is not unfair. I think it's absolutely fair to say there has to be a sober process around that. I would argue there's a reason, even though I told you there's been disagreements at the PEP level, there's been rejections of specific initiatives of this administration. Everyone's kept talking, everyone's been respectful. We've recognized that can be done effectively. So if anyone really disagreed, we would have a dialogue and we'd try and resolve it. But if I had an appointee who was just absolutely clear they no longer supported the vision that they had been appointed under, I think I do have a right to make a change at that point, because you want someone who reflects the specific philosophy that the people voted for. I think it would be fair to say that there should be a sober, careful process, but I do believe that should be a mayoral right. And again, we're talking for the 3 years of this administration. All
right, great. There have been some legislators call for a 1-year extension as opposed to a 3-year extension. Would a 1-year extension work, or is a 3-year extension really necessary for more stability of the school system?
I appreciate the question, Mr. Chair. Strongly urge, and I know the Chancellor feels strongly too, I strongly urge a 3-year frame because it will bring stability. Honestly, we have never had it. The history is clear that when Mayor Bloomberg proposed mayoral control, he got a very extensive amount of time, and then he got a very extensive renewal, in part because of dynamics that were bluntly referred to earlier, where my entire time until now as mayor, I was dealing with a very recalcitrant Republican Senate leadership. From word one, there was not a serious discussion as to the merits of a longer timeline. It was a very politicized process, and the notion that a system that had been productive was only given a 1-year extension at one point, I think a lot of people in this city and this state saw that as a very political act by the Republican Senate. I think we should get past that. I think giving us the 3 years to finish this agenda strong and in a focused manner is necessary. I do want to acknowledge that when we are not moving the agenda, that all the members of the Senate here are constantly imploring us to focus on, to address that school-to-prison pipeline, to address the inequities. When we're focused on having to wonder if we're even going to have the ability to run the school system as we have, we can't put as much focus into doing the things that you want us to do to help kids. So I think resolving this issue once and for all and saying, okay, 3 years, go with all you got, urgency, get the job done for our kids, that is the best chance we have of continuing to improve this school system.
Ditto.
All right, great. And my final set of questions has to do with the selection of chancellor. Notwithstanding Mr. Carranza himself being here, you know, over the years, I've heard much positive feedback about your first selection of chancellor, Chancellor Farina. Yes. You know, Chancellor Carranza correctly points out that he's only been here for 11 months, so it still remains to be seen what the legacy will be. But we have also seen previous mayors, previous chancellors, one that only lasted for about 3 months, and her predecessor as well. These chancellors who did not meet the criteria of having educational experience. And so there have been calls for the removal of that exemption process, meaning chancellors of the New York City Department of Education should not be exempt from these educational experience requirements. What would your position be on that kind of change? And there have also been calls for some kind of confirmation process for whoever the selection of the chancellor may be from the mayor. So on those 2 points, if you could give us your feedback, those are changes that are being contemplated.
I'm going to speak to both of them. The legislature has to look at the legal wording, and I'm not pretending to be an expert on that, so I just want to speak to philosophical direction. I believe there's no question the chancellor should be an educator. I've chosen 2 excellent educators. It's made a world of difference. I don't know how any mayor would choose anyone but an educator. So I certainly believe that's the way we should go forward. On the question of confirmation, I would caution. I think that is a counterproductive idea, even though I know it's offered in good faith. And I would talk about the difference between the back end of the process and the front end. I'll use the example of this chancellor. This chancellor had a very important job running a school system, one of the biggest cities in the United States of America. We all understand the reality of sensitive personnel dynamics. To get the highest caliber talent, you can't say out loud from moment one, oh, I think this guy in Houston would be great. Let's all talk about it out in the open, because immediately that would have put him in an untenable situation with his current job while he was interested in a different job, and it would have made it impossible for him potentially to be a candidate for this job. And I think that would be true of leading educators all over the country. You would literally create a counterproductive dynamic, an unintended consequence of a number of educators couldn't afford to go through the process for fear that it would undermine their current job without a guarantee they get the new job. So the minute you go through the idea of confirmation, then you're saying, well, maybe you won't get the job in the end. So even I could select you, but then there's going to be a confirmation process. We don't know where that's going. A lot of educators who are great would say, I'm not going to put myself through that when I have a stable job. I think this is why we have to respect the fundamental notion that the voters vote for the mayor on the, and agree to a direction for the schools. The mayor has to choose a chancellor the way all major personnel actions happen, with discretion. But on the front end of the process, I would offer, Mr. Chair, we could have a process with CECs, for example, to nominate potential chancellors and offer names. I don't think it should be a process where those necessarily the only names. I think, mayor may have other ideas. That's perfectly healthy. But I think it would be productive to have parent voices say, here are some of the people we would like you to assess as potential chancellors. That's something I'd be very comfortable with.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the time you spent with us. We certainly look forward to working with you on this and many other issues. I do want to give a shout out. She's already been mentioned, but your Deputy Chancellor, Hydra, with a name like Hydra, no offense, Bill and Richard, but you know, people listen.
Yes.
And also a shout out to Lindsay Oates, your CFO. She's been extremely helpful in helping senators and the public alike dissect the finances of individual schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the members. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right. Our next